As I alluded to at the end of the last video, it's JFK time. So for the sake of this video, what we're going to be looking at with JFK is not so much the domestic stuff, because a lot of that's going to run into the civil rights, and we're going to handle that kind of on its own for a couple days after this. We're going to look primarily at his response to dealing with the Cold War, obviously. And then also, of course, his rise to power and what that kind of says for America. As I mentioned before, the election of 1960 is going to be razor thin. The real thing that historians take away from that, though, is obviously pay attention to Nixon, which... yeah, he's going to be president later. But then also, this is really the first time we're going to start to see television play an impact. In fact, one of the things about JFK is he really leans into what we would call kind of modern understandings of branding, television, that sort of thing. And so this is the first presidential debate that is going to be televised. It's also simulcast on the radio as well. And they show up on the day, and they need these unique huge lights to light people enough for the television, and really some intense heat. And JFK is like, I'm gonna wear makeup so that I don't sweat as much. And Nixon is like, no, I'm a man, I'm not gonna do that, man, I wear makeup. And so he sweats the whole time. And he's constantly seen kind of dabbing at the sweat. And so they do a poll after this debate of who wins. And the people on the radio, so listening just on the radio, they were like, Nixon, he did a great job. He was masterful. He had command of the subject. People on television said, no, JFK, because Nixon was dabbing sweat the whole time. And if you're spending a debate and you're dabbing sweat as the other person talks to you, it looks like you're hot under the collar and you don't have the ability to handle all the stuff you're talking about. And so that's one of the dynamics, and we see that play out now. What about candidates as we enter this digital age? That's television. What about digital? Having control of branding and things like that. So let's talk about something called the Kennedy mystique. And really, this is just kind of about the Kennedys. And there is so much you can learn about all of them, and I'm obviously not going to have enough time for all of that. I will simply say, feel free to Google the Kennedy family. Incredibly messed up. But anyway, this is a family that has political ambitions. You're going to see the sons kind of go into that. They lock up their daughter, and it's a whole thing. Feel free to Google it. It's craziness. But that's what JFK is coming from. And they have wealth as well. But one of the things we want to try and understand is, how does JFK become JFK? And so let's look at a few reasons why. I already alluded to this, but the first one is branding. You are going to see a full understanding of how brands work and how branding works. Photo ops at the White House, all sorts of things that we take for granted as part of presidential campaigns, but were not the thing. And I want to contrast this. Let's go all the way back to Thomas Jefferson, who was like, nah, I'm just going to ride on a horse because the president shouldn't look like a different... That's not what we're seeing here. We're seeing an understanding that the president needs to market themselves very differently. And of course, he's going to come up not as the president, he's a senator. But that branding is going to be incredibly powerful. So the word on this next one is stardom, but I really think we should think about the word celebrity. This is someone who people wanted to follow. And I'm recording this on... the aftermath of that royal interview and whatnot, where people just watched this family dysfunction of the royal family because it was entertaining. Think about that. Celebrities really are coming about. Maybe a touch before this, there's a good argument. I think that one of the first celebrities that America truly has is Charles Lindbergh. And again, you can go on for days about him, but we're starting to see the growth of celebrity. The Beatles are going to come shortly after JFK is assassinated. This iconography, this following of, I'm thinking like pop art that'll come about. You're going to see music, all sorts of things. And we're going to watch a ton of this celebrity focus happen throughout the 60s. And so we're kind of on the beginning of something that we all really take for granted. Heck, you can have a viral video and become a celebrity right off the backs of that. So this idea, this notion is not foreign to us, but we're starting to see it really happen for the first time. Of course, he is the youngest president, and so that youth is something that young people and even older people tend to like, and that's something that's novel and new. And as the slide mentions here, contrast that with Eisenhower, who was older, but think about that now. I mean, who knows where America's going to go in the future, but we're having a run-up of some old presidencies, if you exclude Obama, and the question is going to be, is there going to be a young up-and-comer who's able to capture this kind of spirit that JFK was able to? Or are we too in hyper-partisan times? Like, who knows? But youth does have that allure, especially when you take people who are more tech-savvy, which tends to be, young people, and you give them something that's their age or close that feels attainable, and so that's something that's interesting as well. So the slide mentions idealism, and I think this kind of aligns a little bit with branding as well, but we are going to look at some aspects of JFK that are a little bit more idealistic than you might have seen before. And again, let's go with who have we had. We've had FDR, Truman, and then we had Eisenhower dealing with some really weird, crazy problems that JFK is going to have to deal with as well, but they're not really addressing an opportunity or an idealism that JFK can. FDR coming into power in 1930s is going to have to deal with the Great Depression. He's not going to be able to deal with this 50s kind of boom that America has socially, where we're allowing ourselves to focus on stuff that isn't just economic in nature. We truly are seeing ourselves start to jut out on the world stage, and things look pretty good, and that gives you the flexibility to go, oh, maybe there's some big picture things we can look for. Maybe there's hope. All right, let's get over this part. Yes, JFK is conventionally attractive. Women absolutely like him. Dude is going to have lots of affairs. We'll talk more about that later. But he is attractive, right? Like, look at him compared to Nixon. I guess no offense, Nixon, but JFK is way more attractive than Nixon is. And that's something that, Eisenhower? No. Truman? No. FDR? No. So you have someone who's young and attractive and has a brand and can market that? Yeah, like that's something that's unique. But let's get back to the truly important stuff, the Cold War. So we saw during Eisenhower this massive retaliation and this brinkmanship, the willingness to go to the very edge of nuclear war, and heck, we'll do it. We'll drop those nukes if we have to, and use that as a bargaining chip no matter what the Soviets do. And Kennedy's going to pull back from that. You can see on the slide there is this concern of, okay, if I'm willing to drop the bomb, how do I handle smaller things? And so he's going to go for flexible response, which means I'm going to respond in kind. If you're going to start up some proxy war, I'll counteract with a proxy war. If you're going to drop nukes, I'll drop nukes, right? So I have this range that I can move within. I don't have to just fight the Cold War by leveraging nothing but atomic weapons. I can use conventional forces. I can use some more subvertive type stuff, some proxy war things where it's not directly us, but it kind of is. And again, we'll see that later. Or I can drop those nukes if I have to. We're going to see the creation of the Peace Corps, which may be something you're familiar with. And as you can see on the slide, this is a way for us to try and fight the Cold War in a different way. One of those concerns we had and why we poured money through, Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan is going to be we're concerned about those poorer countries and how they're going to be able to really fight off communism. And so using the Peace Corps is a way to boost America's image, and not only boosting our image, but also making a better relationship between us and these underdeveloped countries. And that's going to be something that we can use to our benefit. Oh, well, remember, America's got our back. Maybe we don't have to turn to this communism. When it comes to the space race, you are going to see Kennedy promise that by the end of the decade, we're going to land a man on the moon. And ultimately, we do. Of course, he's dead by that point. But actually, an interesting thing here, on the day we're landing on the moon, JFK's brother is going to kill a woman at Chappaquiddick. There's a whole movie on that. Feel free to watch that. Yeah, the Kennedy family's weird. In 61, Khrushchev is going to basically threaten to do what Stalin did. I'll cut Berlin off and I'll get it to fall. In fact, you're going to see the Berlin Wall come up at this point, which is such a good iconography of the Cold War. This literal divide between, the communists and the capitalists. And JFK goes to Berlin and he gives a speech. Ich bin ein Berliner. Basically, I'm a Berliner, right? We're all Berliners. We're going to have your back and support you and try and cut this off at the front. Kennedy finds himself dealing a lot with the Cold War and some pretty substantial things in the whole history of the Cold War. And it's important for us to kind of keep in mind, we're going to see a ramping up of tensions around this time period. And I really want us to start building the 60s because that's what we're dealing with. And think about, we're going to get towards the end of the 60s and things are going to be crazy, and every facet of American society is complicated, and there's tension, and we're war with each other, but also war with other countries. It's all complicated. And where does that come from? And we are coming out of the 50s, and in this beginning of the 60s, we're seeing a lot of tension with the Cold War. You're going to see fiascos on Americans' part with the Bay of Pigs, which we'll talk about in a second. We're going to see the ultimate tension with the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then, of course, JFK is assassinated. These periods of potential violence and, of course, violence are really going to shape the identity of, honestly, some really impressionable people. We're talking about baby boomers, right? They're coming up, and some of their first memories are some of these things. It's not that surprising why they might respond in the later 60s by being like, I don't like this system. So Castro's going to take over in Cuba, get aid from the Soviets, be communist, obviously. And towards the end of Eisenhower's final term, you're going to see this idea of like, there are people in Cuba who don't like what's going on. They start defecting to America. What if we trained them? I don't know, with like the CIA. And then we got them to invade their own country, Cuba, and kind of push back and maybe ultimately overthrow Castro. Let's give that a shot. And so they starts like creating the process for this. JFK comes into power and is like, all right, I guess let's do it. And that's going to lead to a huge fiasco with the Bay of Pigs. So the Bay of Pigs is, let's launch this, assault. And so it has these grand dreams, and I'll shout out the first Black Ops video game, because I think in the first episode of the campaign, I think you kill Castro. That doesn't happen. This doesn't really actually work at all. They're kind of stopped immediately, and it's revealed pretty quickly that America was kind of involved in doing this, and it looks bad. Kennedy has to get up on the world stage and then be like, yeah, that's our bad. We did that. Probably shouldn't have done it, so sorry. But the real test of Kennedy is going to be the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we are flying and spying like we do, and we spot some missile locations in Cuba. And these are Soviet nuclear weapons, and they're really close to America, obviously. And so there becomes this showdown. What are we going to do? And that's really the question Kennedy has. What should I do? Some options that he's given: attack and blow up the missile locations themselves. Or, I don't know, invade Cuba entirely and overthrow the whole thing. Nothing. Do nothing. I mean, like, right? Lots of extreme options, and then some more nuanced options. One option of these more nuanced ones is put up a blockade around Cuba and prevent the Soviet Union from bringing in additional things. We are going to implement this. Another one is, what about a missile trade? Be more diplomatic. We give up some, they give up some. Ultimately, we'll do this, but it'll kind of be a little secret. Now, we're kind of glossing over this because we know the ending, but I really want to stress, Americans didn't, right? They obviously didn't know what was going to happen. What we know is we are on the edge of a war, a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. We put this blockade up, and there's this tracking. Like, as these boats are getting closer, what's gonna happen? Where are they gonna cross? And actually, one of the first reboots of the X-Men franchise, the one where they're young again, they actually have this scene with this Cuban Missile Crisis, and it's this Soviet boat coming closer. Are they going to cross? And then they, make it fiction and whatnot. But there is that question, and Americans are very concerned. Another reference here, the Stephen King novel 11/22/63. There's a reference that involves like time travel and the assassination of JFK. Worth it. I think Hulu made a show on it. I didn't care for it, but whatever. Anyway, there is a good reference in that book about the tension that people felt walking around. People legitimately thought the world could end. And think about duck and cover. Think about what everyone has been taught. Everything's coming at any point, and now you're like, oh, everyone was right. It is coming. So these 13 days, Kennedy barely sleeps. There's all sorts of craziness. And this actually will come back in future presidential elections where it's like, that is the test. That's the pinnacle of what a president needs to be able to do. And we need you to be strong and capable of it. The irony in all of this, though, is that JFK is actually dealing with Addison's disease. He has a bad back. He's got lots of health issues. His doctor, you know what? I'm going to get more into this when we get to the assassination. We'll just hold on to that. But ultimately, we are going to be able to end this. Publicly, the Soviets back down, and we get to stand there as the ones who didn't blink. And then privately, we had put our own missiles in Turkey, which was close to the Soviet Union, and so we agreed to take ours away because we'd kind of already done the same thing they did in Cuba. We had done that as well. So that's what privately happens. But publicly, we won. Of course, one of the biggest things about JFK is his assassination. And I'm going to go a little bit more in depth on this and deal with some of those conspiracy theories during the live portion. However, he is traveling to Dallas. He is going to be assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. I guess we'll run through that kind of quickly. JFK is traveling in an open car. His route has been public knowledge. It's been in the newspapers. And Lee Harvey Oswald is working in this book warehouse, essentially, on the route. And he used to be a Marine. He was a sharpshooter with the Marines. He fell all down in this hole of the Soviet Union and communism. He actually went there, came back with a wife. And he was notable for passing around pamphlets in his neighborhoods about, like, we need to support Cuba. We need to stop, all this anti-Cuba stuff. And just kind of an odd character. He had actually attempted to assassinate a general earlier that obviously he was not caught for at that point. There is some experience from him on this part of assassination, but he decides he's going to assassinate JFK. And so we'll watch the Zapruder film in class, which feel free to watch that now if you want. There actually is video of JFK's assassination. Lee Harvey Oswald is going to shoot him. JFK is going to slump over, be raced to the hospital. Lee Harvey Oswald is then going to exit the warehouse. He's going to be kind of making his getaway. And he's going to be kind of stopped by the police, but not for this. It's for this entirely other thing. And he thinks it's about the assassination stuff. And so he has a handgun and he shoots and kills the police officer. And then he goes into a movie theater. So, like, these two things are happening in tandem. There is the, oh my God, someone shot the president. Where did those bullets come from? JFK's rushed to the hospital. People are trying to figure out what's happening. And then simultaneously, there's Lee Harvey Oswald killing a cop. And, well, they didn't know his name, but someone had killed a cop. Oh, he went over there. And so the police actually go find him. They go into this movie theater and they find him and they bring him out and they arrest him and he's at jail. And then you have the investigation of, all right, I think they came from here. The shots came from here. Hey, let's go into this warehouse. Oh my God, we found the gun. Hey, where's this list of the employees? And it's like, oh, well, the only one not here is this guy, Lee Harvey Oswald. They're back at the police station. They're like, oh, we got to find this guy. And someone's like, oh, he's down the hall. Yeah, we brought him in for killing a cop. Yeah, he's down there. And they already have him. JFK, of course, dies. He is announced dead at the hospital. That news is carried live. There's all sorts of pictures and videos you can see of people responding. And one I saw recently was a bunch of people on a train. Just everyone has the newspaper, the president's dead, all that. And it truly shocks the nation. LBJ is Lyndon Baines Johnson is the vice president. He's sworn in on Air Force One. You can see Jackie in her bloodstained clothes, and we'll get into more of what Jackie's experience was during the live, but you can see her there and that kind of shock and awe. And there was a concern by the American government, right, of we need to show that there's a normal procedure for to do this, and that's why they wanted Jackie there when LBJ was sworn in. Of course, Lee Harvey Oswald is then going to be killed by Jack Ruby. There's all sorts of conspiracy stuff about that. Jack Ruby did have ties to the police, and so there, of course, could be an angle of, like, he was upset that he had killed a cop, but also, like, he killed the president, and, like, come on, that's a problem. So there were plenty of people mad enough to extract vengeance on Lee Harvey Oswald, but we'll deal with that again during live. Again, we're going to cover the civil rights element during our civil rights part of this unit, so we'll hold off on that for JFK for a little bit. But the keys in looking at this are he's going to deal with some tremendously complicated and difficult situations around the Cold War and foreign policy. Of course, there's going to be the beginnings of the modern civil rights movement that he's going to be dealing with domestically. But of course, there is a lot to know about JFK and how we're going to see a change with his presidency into what we kind of expect, not only with presidents, but with politicians, and then also the growing power of the media and things like that. Now, of course, it's important to note LBJ, not going to be the media type person that JFK was. Nixon is not going to be that. Carter's not, Ford's not. So we're not going to see really a great representation or replica of JFK really again, but we're going to start to see some of the powerful impacts of that branding and that marketing and the media pop up in future candidacies.